Let me just start, because when I was selected as to be the candidate for the Labour Party in Hammersmith, which was in 1977, I think, or 78, I was elected in 79, I didn't mention Northern Ireland at all in my campaign, but I, like so many people here, I was both appalled by what was happening. Tragically, you just saw it as a big tragedy, and you also couldn't understand how Britain and Ireland, as two close neighbours for hundreds of years, weren't able to get together and solve this problem. And I felt particularly strongly that the only way we were going to solve it was by the British government working closely with the Irish government and getting an agreed way forward. In that way, you would involve both communities in Northern Ireland. And so, fairly rapidly, after being elected, to many people's surprise, I got involved in the politics of Northern Ireland. That's where I stayed. And I have to say, Alf has always been one of the strong supporters. There was Kevin McNamara, many of you will know, and indeed I was told by an Irish minister some time ago that a lot of us, and especially Kevin, did the heavy lifting before we ended up with the Good Friday Agreement. And of course people like May were very important because she was in the community and the trade union movement. And I can actually say that one of the things that puzzled me was how on earth the trade union movement held together when so much else in the community was falling apart. And I think that's probably where I'd like to start, May, if I could, with a question to you, because I was impressed the trade unions could come out together when there was an industrial dispute or something, but the whole of the shipyard was unionist. And there were, if you were Catholic, you didn't get a job there, as far as I understood it. And yet you were all holding together. So can you tell us a bit about that trade union contribution?
I think in the case of the trade union, I mean, we had a very strong trade union in the 50s and 60s in Northern Ireland. We had a lot of people, David Blakely and people like that, who were really pushing the trade union line. And at that time, of course, we had very low wages and poor conditions, so people were recruited into the union. There was a very strong feeling there. For instance, I worked in a mill which was 75% Catholic, but it was never mentioned. The only time it was mentioned was when we tried to bring in the Fair Employment Act in the 70s, and everybody had to put down what they were, and then there was a whole hoo-ha. But the trade union movement, I mean, in one sense you're right, it did play a part. In one sense you're wrong. Because there's a lot of people in the trade union movement would have got out for a strike, got out for a march, and then went back to their own particular area and said, well, I had to do that. My union expected me, but my heart's not really in it. So, and in that sense, I think when Vic Feather, I think it was, come over, and there was the march and the 3 eggs and all that, I began to hope that this could be one way through all this that was going on in my little part of the world. Unfortunately, it all fell apart, and the trade union itself pulled itself apart. So it did, and for a long number of years, there was support, but it was very passive support. And there were people, of course, who put real heart and soul into it, and many of them had died through alcoholism because they just couldn't keep up to the pressures that was going on, both in the workplace and at night outside. I mean, I could work in the mill among different people. Once you went outside, you were in your own community, and there was lots and lots of things happening in those communities that the trade union just couldn't solve. It just was beyond them.
Yeah. That's very helpful in a way, because I was puzzled at the time. I didn't understand how it worked, and I remember asking some of the union leaders, well, how do you keep the divisions out of the union movement? And I was increasingly getting known as the person who said we wanted a united Ireland, but it would have to be by consent. But and then I started getting letters saying your name's not really Soley, it's Foley. So you thought, well, okay, that's what they think, because I had no connections with Northern Ireland. And then they discovered I wasn't religious. So you're not Catholic, not a Protestant. We had all of these things right now. But the thing that, in a way, there were two things that grounded me in a way in Northern Ireland. One was the trade union movement. The other one was communities, groups, and you played a very prominent part in the community groups in Northern Ireland, which must have been a very delicate tightrope to walk.
Well, I have to say, Clive, when the Troubles actually kicked in, and really in the early 70s, they were very vicious.
Yeah.
People had nowhere else only to go into their own community.
Yeah.
And even after internment in the 80s, when many Catholics were lifted and taken away, and nobody knew where they were. Those women that were left behind had to do for the community, and suddenly they discovered they could do it, and that's how the women of both sides of the community came together. But you know, it's interesting in respect of that, because I was thinking while I was answering the question, I can remember where there was marches for the trade union marching against this and that and the other thing, and then I would have seen some weeks later the same trade unionists at their Orange Lodge or whatever, you know, and you were saying to yourself, these guys aren't really serious. Not to say it was all men, women wouldn't do that sort of thing. But you know, you were saying these guys aren't serious. And in one way, I was kind of looked upon as, here's this head case coming again. You know, she wants us all to like each other and all that. But I was born into that kind of a situation. I was born into a mixed community. So it was natural for me. But it was unnatural for a whole lot of people.
I think it must have been very unnatural, because it seemed so alien to me, having been born and brought up in London, you know, where religion didn't matter and the Irish politics we weren't aware of. You know, you just looked at this and thought how terrible. And I remember quite early on, I decided we needed to talk to the political representatives of both Unionists and Republicans. One of the people you mentioned not long ago was David Irvine on the Union side, who I had a great respect for. Actually, he was a very able guy. But I arranged to go and see Gerry Adams and Danny Morrison. It must have been very early on. It must have been either 79 or 80, somewhere around there. And of course, at that time, if I went over to Northern Ireland, you'd get heavy security, and to Southern Ireland too, you'd get heavy security. And I said, I'm going to see Gerry Adams. And at that stage, the Thatcher government was very much against any contacts, so I didn't get any security, and I left the hotel without security, where I'd had it before, and I went and hired a car, and I drove down to Sinn Féin's headquarters, because I wasn't going to get in the bus with my accent. I didn't think that would be a good idea, and I wasn't going to hitch either. So I drove down there, and I went up through the wire fencing around his office there, and knocked on the door, and Gerry was utterly amazed, as also was Danny Morrison. And they invited me in. Where's your security there? I said, I haven't got any, but I'll park down the road there. And then we started talking, and what I wanted to know is if they really understood that Britain just couldn't walk away from this, actually. And I started asking about what would happen. I said it was very unlikely. This is the early 80s when the Labour Party couldn't win an election anywhere. And I said, what would happen if the Labour government was elected tomorrow morning and said, we're going to withdraw from Northern Ireland, and you see those troops going down the road towards the docks, and they're all going up, what would you do? And he gave me a long explanation. You have to remember, you all know actually, that Gerry at that time was very much a Frantz Fanon, the revolutionary mode, and I knew my Frantz Fanon, and I said, yeah, that's what you're describing to me. You know, all the parties will collapse, north and south, and we'll have a new Ireland. And I said, yes, but, you know, what will you do on that day that the troops are going down? Because you won't get any warning, because everybody will arm if you do that. And he started again and started that again. I said, yes, I know, but what will you do? And Danny Morrison cut in. Danny Morrison I didn't know well, but he was shrewd enough, because he said, look, we're not daft, we're not going to invade the Shankill. And that's when I knew, in a sense, that they knew that we couldn't just walk away from it, and we had to have some. Does that make some sort of sense?
It does, but you see, people in the 70s and early 80s, there was a lot of talking going on that nobody was aware of, for the want of a better word. And interesting enough, some nuns were involved in it, and some Presbyterian women ministers. Now, that's never been common knowledge until recently, when the sisters decided to make it public knowledge, and they've now done a whole programme around it, and they brought in Protestant women who were in the secret talks. But you know, when you look back in those days of secret talks, you look back at Alec Reid, Kenyon, people who took real risks. And I mean, I worked with Gerry Adams on the peace line for a huge number of years, and I know what he was like, he knew what I was like, but we could work together, and it was always kind of unwritten that first of all the British Army was never going to walk away in that sense, and secondly, Sinn Féin didn't want them to walk away. It was as clear as a nose in your face. But Adams and Emmons, you know, at that time, as I say, there was a lot of private talk going on, and nobody really knew who was involved. You weren't allowed to know. And that was the right way. You weren't allowed to know. Jerry Reynolds, who gave his life to reconciliation. And that was all going on in the background. So even though politicians were coming over from here and speaking to people on the ground, They even weren't aware of the good work that was actually happening, and a lot of people back in those days took real risks for peace. The like of John Hume, people like that, who and Seamus Mellon, I mean, really took a lot of risks. Now, we didn't have as many risk takers, unfortunately, with our Protestant elected representatives, because if they'd have been in secret talks, we would all have knew about it. Anyway, but that was the nature, and people get used to that sort of backdrop, people working in the background, people doing things in the background, the trade union movement. In some cases, they done it, working in the background, and unfortunately, people, I don't think people who, unless they've actually lived there, I don't think they understood just how dangerous that could be. I mean, it was really dangerous. I can remember one occasion when I had been particularly outspoken, which is not like me, if you know that. I remember coming out in my car, someone had actually burned the whole bonnet of my car with acid. And I left a little note saying, "It's your car this time." Now, I'm not making that for bravado, but the people who were in the secret talks were taking bigger risks. They could be taken up the road and never heard tell again, by both sides, because there were people who simply didn't want it to happen.
You're absolutely right about lots of talking going on. After a while, I was talking to Jerry and McGuinness, and I would then talk to the Patrick, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and they both knew what we were doing, but in fact there were far more important talks going on in the background, which were profoundly important. Absolutely. But I wonder if I may turn to Alf, because Alf got involved. Now, I've known Alf since he got elected with me in another constituency, needless to say, 1979. But he took an interest in Northern Ireland, and a number of us were being told, well, don't put your whole political career there because it will end in tears. But Alf, you'll remember, we went to both Northern and Southern Ireland a number of times to see what was happening. And I remember going into Dublin, where we got very heavy security, because I think it was after Mountbatten had been killed, and they didn't want to lose a couple of British MPs. But I had a desire to walk along the route that James Joyce had Ulysses take in the book on Ulysses. Now, there aren't many people who've read Ulysses. I have, right? I still read it. I like it, okay? And I wanted to walk that route, so I tried walking it. Because we got totally lost, but we were walking along this wall in a totally empty street with a police car about 200 yards behind, and it would drive past us, stop, let us walk by, and we'd go on like this. And after a while, I said, "Look, I'm lost. Let's get the guys in the car to take us to a restaurant." And we said, "Right, take us to a restaurant." And they drove us back, and then we drove back. And Alf, one of the reasons it's good to go with Alf, actually, he loves talking to people and getting to the root of what they see the problem at. And we went past the post office, which, needless to say, had some people taking signatures. And Al said to me, "Come on, Clive, let's get out and talk to them." And I said, "Al, I knew it wasn't a good idea, but I couldn't immediately connect. So I said, "Al, I don't think that's a good idea." And Al said to me, "But it's all right, they won't know who we are. We're new MPs." And the police officer said in a beautiful Dublin accent, which I can't possibly repeat, he said, "They might not know who you are, sir, but by God they'll know who I am." And that's why I think Alf is so valuable to have with you. Al, can you tell us what your reactions were when you started looking at the problem, both with me and later on your own?
Well, one or two stories. I mean, on that, just to go back on that one, we then went to see the Taoiseach, Gareth Fitzgerald,
yes.
And he said, "Who have you been to see this morning?" And we mentioned the bishop we'd seen before, and he said, "The man has a liberal reputation, but the truth belies it." He said, "In my experience, Irish bishops are a gloomy lot of people. I think Christianity in Ireland will get on better without them." That was a Taoiseach, and that was some years ago in the position of the Catholic Church. So anyway, he was a lovely man, and we chatted to him for quite a long time. But before that, before we got down to Dublin, we'd been to Armagh Women's Prison. And there was an argument then about political status. You probably remember that. And all women, some were Republican and some were loyalist. And there was terrible discipline among the Republicans, the women. And none of them would speak to us until their leader spoke to us. And I think she was called Moira Fowle. She was then killed in Gibraltar later on by the SAS. And then once he spoke to us, the elders could do it. But there was a tremendous discipline. And I thought to myself, these are young women, intelligent, personable, and so on, and yet they've been caught up in this situation, and what's going to happen to their lives? And I felt for them. And then when I heard that she'd been shot later on in Gibraltar in an ambush by the SAS, I thought to myself, what is happening here? What is going on? So I was all along. I was pretty committed to. And at that time, certainly in the Labour Party, probably in the Conservatives as well, there were a whole body of opinion of people who knew about Ireland. Names Kevin McNamara, Jock Starr, the whole list of people who knew about Ireland probably as much as most of us know. And somehow that had an effect on the sort of sense of what the politics was about. And then it's all moved on, and we've now got a generation of MPs probably who don't know much about it at all, for whom some of what we're talking about would be totally new, and not to you, but to them. And somehow British politics is the worst for a lack of understanding and a lack of sense of Ireland as we used to have it. I'm lucky, I'm on the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly. I meet politicians from Dublin quite a lot. I meet Irish ministers and so on, so I can keep in touch. But I should say one interesting thing we're doing. I'm chair of a committee. British Irish Parliamentary Assembly has parliamentarians from Dublin, London, Edinburgh, Cardiff, and Belfast.
The Challands.
And the Challands as well. Anyway, and one interesting thing is that we're now looking at the committees. We've had to stop because of the Irish elections, no Irish members. But we're looking at the situation as regards indigenous minority languages. And this was put as an argument, and the committee discussed it. Interestingly, the DUP member of the committee said that was fine by him. With all the discussion going on about Gaelic and so on, it's interesting we're looking at it. We've just taken evidence in Wales, and now we're going to, once the committee is re-established after the Irish elections, we'll be moving to Derry and Scotland and so on to pick up on it. It's interesting that the DUP actually said that was okay. Maybe the guy who said it was not very popular with the DUP, but it is. Anyway, that's part of the background. But then, of course, to my surprise, when we won the election, Labour won the election in '97, I think Clive had some influence on this, but I was asked, I got the call from Tony Blair asking me whether I'd go to Northern Ireland as a junior minister with Molam, and that sort of changed my life completely. And I could talk about all that happened there for hours. It'd be all past your bedtime, so I'm not going to do that. But it was interesting because there I was, hungover from having won the election, the election victory, and the phone call came, and I didn't expect it, and Tony Blair said, I'd like to go to Belfast, and then Molam phoned me, and get over here quickly, and so I shot over. And of course, from just walking about, I lived in Paddington then, walking about Paddington and so on, and suddenly I found myself arriving at Belfast International Airport, 2 close protection officers, bulletproof cars and all that, a totally different world there. And I could only sleep in a secure zone and so on. So it was quite a transformation. There was no ceasefire then. We're working for a ceasefire, but the ceasefire had stopped, and then we're hoping for another ceasefire. So it was quite tough times, and I was, it was a total change in my life.
When the ceasefire happened and you were a minister, how did your work change?
Well, no, I think it was a positive step, something we'd been hoping for, and it was a positive step. And I tell you what it was. If you're a minister in Northern Ireland and there's no peace process, you're just containing a situation. It's very depressing. But we were lucky because Tony Blair got to a lot of things said about Tony Blair, but this is very positive. And his first major speech as Prime Minister was in Belfast at Balmoral. And he came there and he made his speech and he talked about the peace process. And I remember he saying, I was sitting a few yards away from him, and I remember him saying, and Sinn Féin should know that if they don't get on the peace train, it'll leave without them. This is a chance for peace. And it was a very dramatic day, and it changed the whole mood in Northern Ireland. So it was not surprising the ceasefire followed soon afterwards, but it was a British Prime Minister totally committed. First speech after winning a big election victory, and then he was with a total commitment to peace there, and that was terrific.
I remember, you see, when the ceasefire happened, it became much easier to talk openly to the various groups, you know, and I had a line which I wouldn't talk to people who were wanted by the police, but I would talk to the elected members of parties, whatever the parties were. That was my basic line. But and that worked quite well, and I always made a point of talking to both sides and not giving publicity to either, which is the mistake that some people made in the Labour Party, in my view, a very big mistake, which held things back in a number of ways. But the interesting thing to me, and May, your view of this would be interesting, I found that the attitude changed in other ways, because I was asked by Sinn Féin to talk to the Dublin branch of Sinn Féin, and I went over and talked to him, and the guy who picked me up was young, very enthusiastically, you know, anti-British and British, but he recognised the importance of the move. And then he said to me, I said to him, have you been over to Britain at all? He said, well, I went once. And he said, I went to London, but I was only there for the weekend. I don't know what he did, but that was by the way. But I said, well, what did you feel about it? He said, there's an awful lot of people who are black there, and, you know, and he actually said something which here would have been, oh no, you know. But he was very struck by the ethnic minorities in London. And of course, as a constituency MP, I would have to say half of the people who were killed by IRA bombs or actions, not just in my constituency, but elsewhere, had in fact been from Commonwealth countries or other countries. There were Pakistani, very sad family. There was another guy, a railway guy, who was shot on the railway line, who was Caribbean. You know, and they weren't aware of that. And it really brought it home to you how we'd somehow or other become two very separate communities, not looking at each other, not seeing each other. I don't know if you recognise.
I think that came through the fact that for a long number of years in Northern Ireland we never seen a black person.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been absolutely, you know, but now it's quite a frequent thing.
Yeah.
But the young people who were in Sinn Féin, and indeed the young people who were in the Unionist parties, it didn't come into their thinking. There was only Protestant and Catholic.
Yeah.
I remember years ago going to America to talk about integrated education, which is my passion, and this guy came up to me afterwards and he said, I didn't know you had blacks and whites in Northern Ireland. I says, we don't. He says, oh, you're talking about boys and girls. I says, no, I'm talking about Protestants and Catholics. And he looked at me because I had no concept of what I was even talking about. But that's the way those days were. It was almost as if we had enough problems of our own without taking on other problems.
There was a governor of a prison in the States who came over to visit for some reason, I know not, but she came and had a chat with me too, and she was black, and she said to me, I'll tell you what you should do about Northern Ireland. She said, bring over a lot of blacks from America, and they'll have someone else to work on. I said, I don't think we can do that, but I know we were at. It was very interesting.
Well, I must tell you a funny story about black people. As I say, it was very rare. And up where I live right up on the peace side of West Belfast, still live there, and during the Troubles, the army was encamped in the local primary school, which is just across the road from me. I went down to get my dad. My dad worked 11 o'clock in the petrol station. I went down to pick him up. My father was a great British soldier now, but was a great man for people were people. But anyway, we were driving along. The next thing, what we called them pigs, 2 armoured cars drove up and stopped me. And the soldier said I was speeding and searched the car. And my father, being an ex-British soldier, said, now come on son, we're doing no harm. And the mouthful of language he gave out was tremendous. Anyway, cut long story short, I brought my dad home. Nothing would do my dad, but I would go over to the army and protest. So I went over and I knocked the door, and the guard said, what do you want? I says, I'd like to see the officer in charge. Right, so he opened the door and let me into this room, and there was 12 men lying in beds in this room, stark naked. They had been on patrol, they'd done 12 hours, just dropped their uniforms off, dropped into bed, and the next morning they were up and away. Anyway, the next thing the officer arrived. He says, I'm the officer in charge, what's your problem? And I told him all about this soldier. And he says to me, could you identify the soldier? I says, no, you all look alike in your uniform. Do you know what he said to me? That's the best compliment he's ever paid. He was black. Right. And I never even noticed he was black. He says, that's the best compliment that's ever been paid to me. Yeah. And you know, ever since that's always stayed in my mind. But in those days, we were just worrying about ourselves.
Yeah.
The outside world was wrong. We,
Yeah, yeah.
we in Northern Ireland, we still think it. We in Northern Ireland think we're the centre of the universe. Everything should work for us.
That's why I was interested in the book The Milkman recently,
Yeah.
won the prize, very
Yeah.
interesting. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, just can I go back to the question you asked, but The Milkman is a great book.
Yeah, really good.
Alan Burns, I've already read it, but it's not an easy read, but I think it's a fantastic book about Belfast.
The mood.
And you really feel it stays with you, it haunts you a bit if you're into reading novels. But just to go back to your question, you know, things did change. I remember we first got there, and there were two things that happened. One is the Tory government had insisted that they would never shake hands with Sinn Féin because it would upset the unionists. Well, I said to my mum, this is ridiculous, you know, because you've got people running around trying to shake hands with me. So Mo said, use your judgment. So I was going to, can you handle bad language? Anyway, so Mo said, oh, use your judgment. So I went to a place in County Tyrone in Martin McGuinness's constituency. And I'd met Martin McGuinness some years before. So anyway, and people came out and said, look, all the television cameras are there with Martin, wanted to photograph you. And they expected me to, anyway. So I said, thanks so much. I walked across, Martin said, hello, Alf. I said, hello, Martin. Shook hands quickly, and they go. And one of the cameramen said, I missed that. And the other one said, fuck it, so did I. Anyway, but you know, it was part of breaking the ice, because when we got there, you know, they always look suspicious of the new government, Labour government, and ministers and so on. You know, Sinn Féin were pretty aggressively hostile for a time verbally. And then somehow the charm offensive began. And my God, the discipline with which they charmed us all. I mean, we could do no wrong at the time. Fantastic charm and so on. I think it was helped by the fact that I'd been there 3 weeks, and there was a demand from the unionists for my resignation. And you know, normally you don't ask, you're not asked to resign that quickly. And I went back to London and talked to other ministers. Have you been asked to resign? No, I've got the first demand for resignation. Anyway, they dug out a speech I made in the Commons in the late 70s or early 80s, when I'd said things in support of United Ireland. And you know, the union said, oh, this is unacceptable, and so on. Now, obviously, the policy changed, and we wanted the whole business of consent. But there was a mood that changed, and things got better. And you're quite right, things got easier. Although some difficult things happened. The Omagh bombing happened, the shooting at Points Pass, and so on. Difficult things happened. But nevertheless, and then we had the first summer we were there. They had the march and the Gavaki Road business, and the police couldn't hold them. The police couldn't stop the marchers getting through. And by the following year, they were determined never happen again. And the Chief Constable said to Mo, you know, I haven't got enough resources to stop them. I can't do it. So they marched through, and that sent shockwaves. And Mo was criticised for having been too weak with the marchers. And she said, it'll never happen again. And the following year, I went to have a look at the Gavaki Road, and the whole of NATO couldn't have got through there. You know, it was absolutely, and you know, it was political because it was the credibility of our Secretary of State and her credibility on the line, and the people shouldn't be able to sweep the police aside and do the marching. So there were bad things happen, but on the whole, bit by bit, the mood got much better.
Yeah, things have progressed. You're talking about Factory Road. I work with people on Factory Road, and they're coming to the Shackle to see some of the work we're doing. So work has progressed. Yes, at the beginning it was very, very difficult. There were a lot of people on both sides who wanted that to remain as a headbutting. But gradually common sense took over, and that all changed. We were talking earlier about Kevin McNamara, and Kevin visited Northern Ireland on a whole host of occasions. And I remember one time I was speaking at a conference that he was chairing, and he got up and he said, I'm going to introduce chairperson, chairwoman. I'm not sure what to call you. I says, look, wait to tell you, Kevin, I don't care what you call me as long as you don't try to sit on me.
The other person I think actually who influenced, I think both, certainly me and I think Alf in the House of Commons, was Jock Stallard, who was the MP for Camden, who was very good. And I have to say this too, because he wasn't popular with the Republican side, but Don Concannon, who I worked with as the front bencher at the time, was very interesting because he told me, look, with this road we've tried, we've spent millions on this road. He had an approach which was, if we could deal with unemployment, the problem would be reduced. And there's truth in that, but there was still a hardcore issue in the middle.
And we're still working on that
but
problem.
Don would tell me how, as a British soldier, he'd stood on the lines in Palestine between Israeli and Palestinians, keeping them up armed with a pickaxe handle, because that's what they did with the British troops there, to keep the side apart before the United Nations took over. And that's where I realised that Pete Don, who had that army background, had a knowledge of, and this is why I think he was very popular with a lot of the unionists, actually, because he threw money at things like new roads and everything else he could. But he, like all of us at the time, was struggling with what our strategies should be and how should we take forward. But, mate, I must ask you this, because it was so important to you in your work, integrated education. Because when I went there at first, I thought, well, you know, I knew about the problems, I read about it, and I knew there were separate schools. But when I asked one of the religious leaders, I think it was the Catholic religious leader actually, why they still had them, he actually gave me an ear bashing as to how dare I sort of question this. And my line was basically, look, if you're putting children into these boxes when they're kids, I didn't really approve of religious education schools anyway. I think there's a problem about them.
I agree.
But you know, we see it now with Islam as well. You know, so it's a complicated problem, but it's one we have to address. But what I'm fascinated by, I then thought, well, I don't know enough about it, so I better stop talking about it. But you haven't done that. You've not only kept talking about it, you kept working at it. So where are we at it, and what's your feeling? Was I right to stop talking about it?
Integrated education started way back in 1981, one of the darkest days of the Troubles. And during the hunger strikes and that, and a group of parents decided they wanted their children to be educated together. Now, there were middle-class people who perhaps were well educated themselves and seen the value of bringing the kids together. But those 28 children had to be escorted to that school every day by armed guard.
I remember that.
Today we have 25,000 children go to integrated education. Not enough, but we're getting there. It's beginning. Community in Northern Ireland is changing Northern Ireland at the moment. You've seen the voting patterns recently, and that's one of the reasons we had Stormont up and running again, because there was an election within a matter of days. And I always say there's nothing concentrates your mind like a hanging. But integrated education is actually beginning to take place in a meaningful way. My problem is we have to fundraise from day one, because it's not supported by the government until 2 or 3 years to it proves itself. So we have to raise a lot of money, and I'm just worried if we raise people's aspirations and not be able to fulfill them. But we'll keep at it. We raise about $1.5 million a year to keep it going. We have 65 schools. We have 10 new schools coming on through the Fresh Start Agreement in 2015. So things are looking very good, but there is still opposition. And it's not just opposition from the Catholic side, because they say we're taking the children away from their parish. And I agree with you, I don't believe religious education should be in school, but anyway, it's there, it's part of our curriculum. And we're not taking anybody away from anything. If a child goes in integrated school as a Catholic, it gets whatever religious education it requires. On the Protestant side, Presbyterian churches totally opposed to integrated education, and I'm a Presbyterian. I went to see the moderator, and he says, oh, no, we wouldn't entertain it. That's giving away a Protestant school. So that thinking's still there, and that's something we're still working against. But the tide of opinion, public opinion, is changing. People are now beginning to look across the board. People are beginning to look, where can I get the best education for my kids? Where can I get them the best opportunities? And integrated education offers them to parents who want that. But there's still big opposition. It's not all love and we all love each other in Northern Ireland. Very far from it. But we are making progress. And the change that came about in our politics, the change is coming about in integrated schools. Mixed marriage, for instance, I'm old enough to remember mixed marriage. You'd have been shocked for it nearly. We had a couple married, one from the Shagger, one from the Falls, and they came to live in our street. And we used to think it was hilarious, because the priest came one day to visit them, and the minister came the next day. And we just thought that was hilarious. Today, mixed marriage is one of the most popular phenomenons in Northern Ireland, and people go out of their way to tell you, I'm a Catholic, she's a Catholic. You know, I don't care what they are. But people are beginning to change, and I think, you know, in the next 10 years, we will see big change. One of the things we have to definitely get rid of is parallel on both sides, and they're still there.
What I want to know, in a sense, I used to ask myself this, how difficult is it for a child to go to one of the non-religious schools when they come from a community with all the other children are going to one of the religious
Well, you see,
schools?
all our schools are religious,
Yeah.
because in every school integrated and everything, religion's part of the curriculum.
Yeah, but there's a Catholic schooling and there's a Protestant school. If you're in an area where all the children are going to the Catholic school or the Protestant school, what does a child who suddenly
Well,
told
it's
you're going
extremely-
to? Because in the early days, I remember one which was non-denominational. You could go there, and I often wondered how the kids coped.
It's extremely difficult. I mean, integrated education is not that old. I remember kids who used to go through my estate
Right, yeah.
would have taken their uniforms off
Yeah,
because
yeah,
they would have
I
been
wonder.
immediately
Yeah.
nominated as an integrated school.
Yeah.
But you know, that's changing.
Yeah.
That's changing. The kids now go through my school, my estate, in droves.
Yeah.
That's changing. Parents are beginning to look at things more sensibly. They're beginning to be more aware of what's happening, and that's why you see the change in our politics. And that's why our politicians gallop back into storming so quick, because that change was there. And that change will continue. People are now beginning to take an interest in politics. For instance, in women, when we set up the Women's Coalition, there were no women in any major offices within politics. Today, both main leaders are women. You know, we have 5 parties, of which three are led by women. But that tells me a joke, because a comedian in Northern Ireland once said, not so long ago, that there's one thing about it: this proved that equality works.
Yeah, right.
And everybody, what does he mean? Says, well, when the men were in power, they made a mess of it. Now with women in power, they're making the same mess. So equality works. But it does work in the sense that people on the ground are now more savvy. And within integrated education, we can see that moving on. We have, as I say, we have 10 new schools coming on. We have parents taking the vote to go integrated. And we will support them as much as we can.
I mean, I was very pleased that when I was chairman of the Select Committee on Northern Ireland, I came back late one night from Northern Ireland. I had 3 of the MPs in the taxi with me, and they did it deliberately. I mean, you could almost guess who they are, actually.
Yeah.
They said, yeah, we've got to get some milk for the flat. We'll go to that Packy lady.
Yeah.
And it was a classic, it was
absolutely.
designed to say, yeah, come on, Clive, react, and I wasn't going to react in the way they wanted.
Yeah.
But I think that is breaking down.
Absolutely.
Good. Do you think so too, Alf?
Yeah, I do. Can I say, I think May has done a fantastic... Can I praise you?
No.
Yes, I can.
He's going to say it anyway, so you've had it.
I think May's done an absolutely fantastic job for integrated education, and I think it is one of the most important things that's happening. I just hope that the Assembly at their back will understand the significance of it, because I think it's the case where the politicians are not quite as much in touch with people as they should be. And I think there's one good statistic is there, that although the percentage going to integrated schools is not large enough, but if you ask parents whether they'd like to have the ability to send their kids to an integrated school, then the figures are 70 to 80%. And I think that is the mood of the times. And May's organised for me to go to one to integrated schools several times, and I think you get a really warm buzz out of it. And occasionally we have events in London where students who've been through integrated schools talk about their experiences, and they are such fantastic people, young people who really have a sense of what the future should be, and they put forward some sane, balanced approach to things. And I think if this is what integrated schools do for young people, this is absolutely terrific.
I said some time ago, last year the Integrated Education Fund was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. We were very honoured when we seen the list of people. And John Finucane, who's Sinn Féin Lord Mayor of Belfast, he's now the MP for North Belfast. He invited us down for a private function in his parlour. And we went down, and I said then when I was speaking that nobody had anything to fear from integrated education. Then I come home and thought about it. There are people in Northern Ireland who fear it.
Yeah.
There are people who fear change.
Yeah.
And change is coming to Northern Ireland. We will see the change maybe not in my lifetime, but the seeds are sown, the foundations is there, and you will see that change. Even within Sinn Féin and all, I mean, I approach a lot of them, they all support integrated. It's just not our outgoing policy, but we'll change that. And it's a question of trying to get everybody on board and see that nobody's taking anything away from anybody.
Yeah. Can I just say, I'm sure you're all aware of this, but so forgive me for teaching you the subject. But you see, I've had people who say, oh well, you know, there's a school somewhere in home where the Catholic Protestant kids are in separate buildings, but they share the same playing fields. You know, and I said that's not integrated. Integrated is about a philosophy. It's about an approach. It's about teaching, understanding. It's about a much broader set of issues than just are the kids together playing soccer or something.
But it's also about, I mean, all the schools it has integrated in recent years have all been Protestant schools. Now they have absolutely no history in their library about Irish. It's all the British history. They can tell you all the kings and queens were. They couldn't tell you nothing about Irish history. That's all changing. And in integrated schools, we actually discuss who started the troubles. Now there's a question. But it's thought through, and kids are given that kind of level of information, and that is filtering through to their families, filtering through to their grandmother. As I say, change is coming to Northern Ireland. There are a lot of people fearful of it, but I'm not. I think Northern Ireland will change to the good.
Well, I've had
people like you.
Yes, I've had a saying for quite a few years actually, and particularly when I'm dealing with when I go to the Middle East, and I had recently an Egyptian saying to me when he was saying, you know, too many Muslims are being killed. I say, yes, the majority of Muslims are killed by other Muslims. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, Iranian and Iraqi war, millions dead. And he said, yeah, but those Iranians aren't really Muslims. And it says it all, because by saying is, you know, God is an idea. There either is one or there isn't one. Whereas religion is an ideology, and like all ideologies, it's subject to splits, divisions, and you fight someone. And I remember when I led a delegation to the former Yugoslavia, so that we could start looking at the possibility of setting up political systems there that worked. The constant harking back to a battle between the Turks and the people in what was the Balkans then. About 500 years ago, was still right up there in there, and it was, of course, it was very much the same in Northern Ireland. And if it's dying out, that's good. It's very hard.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I think it's almost time to open it up for the audience for a bit. So, I invite someone to ask a question. Gentleman down here first. Can you wait for the mic, please? It's coming up to you, and if you would say who you are, it would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Bernard. I just basically live here. I'm originally from Monaghan at home. Just quickly, like in terms of the trauma, just two things I want to bring to the attention. Monaghan, for example, even though Monaghan is in the Republic of Ireland, the border counties of the Republic did experience the same trauma. Like particularly Monaghan, if you look at the map there behind you, Monaghan is closer to Belfast than Fermanagh is.
Right.
You're surrounded by the border. In the old days, you went through Monaghan to get to Fermanagh. Like there's a massive trauma also in the border counties. Donegal is another one as well. You can name the other ones, but I think Monaghan and Donegal particularly, Like Monaghan is a large Protestant community as well. It was decimated with the partition and the economy. Clones was a massive railway junction town once upon a time. Now Clones is decimated, etc. So a place like Monaghan get forgotten about. Like when I was a kid growing up, if you went to Northern Ireland, you're a Southerner. If you're down to the rest of Ireland, you're a Northerner. You had this bubble, it's like we weren't wanted, so. But the other thing as well is, when you go properly, dare I say, to the Republic of Ireland, there still is a credible lack of understanding, dare I say, towards Northern Ireland. There will be people here from all over Ireland, And I still think it's a problem. Like in Northern Ireland, we're trying to keep bringing people together. And the sensible people are reaching out, But you go down the south, people just don't get us. And I dare say, I think they don't help the situation as well. I would love to see an Ireland whereby it doesn't matter if you're British, you're Irish, what you are, we all need to come together. But I think this incredible, dare I say, unfortunate ignorance in the South doesn't help things out as well. What's the best way to try and bridge that gap to move us forward?
Well, it's an important question, but can I just say, in relation to it, I remember saying to Sinn Féin at one stage, I said to them, look, if the violence doesn't stop, you will make Northern Ireland so different from the rest of Britain and from the rest of Ireland that it will be almost impossible, because you could feel the difference. And many people in Southern Ireland didn't want to know about it, and they didn't want Britain to leave for that reason. They were scared of it,
Yeah,
But,
I mean, what you're saying is quite true. In the years that I travelled with the trade union, we used to go down to the south for our meetings, and when we went out to the public night for a drink, all of a sudden people said, I'm from the Black North.
Yeah.
We were a mixture of Protestant Catholics, it didn't matter, we were from the Black North. But even I think that's changing. I think that's changing in a sense now. You see the South recognising, for instance, some of the ones that were in the British Army done, and that's changing. That's a history that was hidden. You weren't allowed to talk about it, you know. And but I think, you know, that will change over time, because I think even the old diehards who want to make that difference are almost moving out, and I think the new modern politics, like I said, Corbyn and Leo, I think they will make a change, because they're showing a different face. And I think, you know, we were saying earlier how smart Simon Corbyn was in the whole Brexit talks. And he was a breath of fresh air to the people in Northern Ireland. You couldn't believe it, you know. So those things will change, but it will take time. It will not just happen overnight.
Just a little story. Molan was very anxious to break down the boundaries, you know, and so on. And what she said was, you know, how Stormont used to be the holy of holies of the Unionists, and she said, we're going to have a pop concert there. And she got Elton John to have a pop concert in the gardens of Stormont. And that hadn't been seen for a long time, if ever. And what wonderful, it attracted, I don't know what Elton John's, you know, some years ago, remember, you know, this was topical. I still is, he was a great guy. Anyway, don't show my ignorance. And what happened was, it was publicised, about 20,000 people came, and they came from all over Ireland. They came from Donegal, they came from Dublin, they came from Belfast. It was absolutely terrific. And it brought them all together, and exactly what Mo Mullin wanted to happen. Let's have an event, let's show that Stormont belongs to all the people, and let us make sure, you know, it works that way. Now, one other story. When I first got there, I had these two guys, close protection officers, all the time, as I was saying. And one of them said to me, "You're on duty this weekend." I said, "Yeah, duty weekends were spent in Hillsborough, otherwise I wasn't in Hillsborough Castle." Anyway, and he said, "Well, I shan't be here." I said, "Well, what are you doing?" And he said, "Well," he said, "about 20 of us in the IUC, and we're going to Dublin to have a blowout for the weekend." Now, there was no ceasefire. And my understanding was the IUC would never go over the border like that. But there they were, 20 of them, just going to have a good time in Dublin. And I thought, there's better cooperation. And I went to Donegal, and there the guards and the IUC, as they still were, cooperated to give handicapped children holidays in Donegal. So there were good things happening even then, but not enough. Not enough, that's the thing. And we have to find ways for more of this to happen. I mean, I was quite surprised at how few people in the south had ever travelled north. You know, it was just amazing. You talk to them, the north was an alien country. More people in the north had gone south, but it was still different.
Nice. Another question, nice and brief if possible, and I'll get more in. That gentleman there, yes, the glass, yes.
What a joy and a privilege to have you with us, May. You really made me laugh with your reference to Kevin. Many, many years ago, I was the wine butler in the House of Commons. Kevin enjoyed notoriety, cross-party notoriety, his fondness for having two lunches and saying, "Billy, any chance of seconds?" But on a more serious note, people like you, May, ordinary grassroots working people, that's why we have peace in Northern Ireland today. People like you who cut through the bigotry, cut through the bullshit, cut through the state-sponsored murder, always holding out for peace, always reaching out to everybody, always promoting such essentials as integrated integration. I'm so happy to have been here and hear you speak this evening. Thank you.
We'll take that as a contribution, and a very generous one. Thank you very much.
Could I just make a remark while
surely.
you're getting the thing? You're talking there about ordinary people, and that's quite true. It's been ordinary people who have solved this problem on both sides of the peace line. I've worked with people who have went through the most difficult times and want a better future for their kids. I remember when Dennis Bradley and Robin Eames were doing a programme around the victims, and I said to Robin Eames, "Tell me, Robin, who am I a victim of?" "What do you mean?" he says. I says, "Well, my brother-in-law was shot by the British Army. I had my best friend shot. He was in the RUC. He was shot by the IRA. I was burned out of my home by Protestants. Who am I a victim of?" And I think people in Northern Ireland slowly realised that we're all victims, one way or another.
That's a very important point, actually. Another, if you can give your name first, it's helpful.
My name's Eamon O'Tierney. I'm from Warren Point, and I'm on the executive of the Labour Party Irish Society. And actually, May's point leads exactly into what I was going to say. Although the period that you're talking about is very much my youth, and the detail and colour it gives to that is really interesting, because I was 15 in 1979. The question I was going to ask was about the current trauma and the recognition of the wider trauma and that has affected people in the north of Ireland due to the Troubles. And I'm very aware that the suicide rate in the north, from having been relatively low compared to, say, Britain, has now accelerated to the point where it is much higher than it is in Britain or the rest of Ireland. And this was exposed by Lara and Keel in some of her writing. And that the reason for that, people think, is because there is a trauma, not just the people who lived through the period of the Troubles, but also in the communities and the children of those people.
It's well known in other situations, when violence stops, suicide rates often go up. It's a very interesting question as to why that is. It's not unique to Northern Ireland, but I don't know if you want to
You're quite right. I mean, the problem with suicide, particularly in the area I live in North Belfast and West Belfast, is tremendous. And, you know, people struggle every day with why. And my sister committed suicide 50 years ago. And every time I hear of a suicide, which we hear on a daily basis now, I go back to that night. So it's not a new phenomenon, suicide. It's probably more publicity around it now. But young people today, you've got to understand, young people who are living in areas like Ardown, like the Shankill, are under tremendous pressure. We still have the paramilitaries, we still have them flogging drugs, still using prostitution as a means of making money, and Clive's quite right, unemployment. And one of the things that really angered me was the fact that in the recent agreement, and it's also in the 2015 Fresh Start, 25 million was set aside to work with the paramilitaries. And I was interviewed and I said, look, what you need to do is put jobs in to that area. To start working with a lad at 18 or 19 years of age is too late. You need to work with children from the day they're born. But somehow or other, our authorities haven't got that. They seem to think they can buy the paramilitaries in, and the paramilitaries are still exploiting that. And suicide's a big thing. I mean, I was asked in America some years ago about this, and I said, look, if I was standing on a street corner, no job, no money in my pocket, and somebody came up to me and said, here's 100 quid, I'll steal that car, I wonder how tempted I would be. And sometimes, you know, we get on our high horse and say, oh, suicide's terrible, but you have to be in that position to know what it actually is doing to our young people, and we have to give them some way that they can climb out of that hole. And there's good work going on all over Northern Ireland, good work in North Belfast particularly, where the suicide rate is so high. But Clive's quite right, you know, we have to work deeper on it, we have to do more work towards it, and we have to give young people a different meaning to life than standing on the street corner.
All right. Other question? Over there. Down there then.
Hi, my name is Shane Murray Doyle. I'm from Dublin. I'm a documentary filmmaker who worked a lot in Belfast back and forth. I don't totally agree with the notion that the South had no thought process about everybody sustainable back north, but that's another story. But the remark of the man, the young Sinn Féin man who went to London for a weekend, and he said, I saw a lot of people of different cultures. And I wondered the reference to the milkman and plays like recent Cypress Avenue with Stephen Ray, and that during that whole period, I wondered when Northern Ireland all of a sudden was in feature films with Brad Pitt and Harrison Ford, or poems by Seamus Heaney, did that culture coming back from the outside world into Northern Ireland, did it mean anything, or did it cause conversations?
I think that's a very interesting question. Before I ask May and Al to respond to it, let me just say this. One of the things that fascinates me about societies that are caught up in these divided problems, one of the things that stood out to me about Northern Ireland was that you had a minority community in the whole of Ireland in form of the Unions and as they saw it, Protestant. And then you had a minority community in the north of Ireland, which of course the Catholic Republican bit. And that it's very difficult in that situation for the people in those two groups in that community to let go. Everything becomes a threat. And you saw the same thing in South Africa with the white community scared stiff of the black community becoming the majority. And you see it in other situations I could give examples of. So it's very real. And the trouble is with it, it becomes very inward looking. It has to be inward looking in a way for the groups to hold themselves together. And that makes it essential, and this was my whole approach in the early days, it was essential for Britain and Ireland to agree a strategy for dealing with the North. And Jim Pryor, the Conservative minister, when he went over to Ireland, came up with the British-Irish agreement in the early stages, which enabled us to work together. And I think, I'd be interested, now May particularly agrees with it, but I get the impression that people in Northern Ireland were holding on to an outside world that was probably related to films and music and culture in some way, but couldn't move out of the lock that they were in without external intervention, involvement in some way. Does that make some sort of sense?
It does and it doesn't, because I mean you're talking about the people in Northern Ireland as a whole. That's not necessarily the way Northern Ireland works. I mean, I was born and learned in a working class area, and I was made to know I was working class, and that was ingrained into me. So therefore I said to myself, unions, they don't want to know me. And at that time there was no Sinn Féin. You know, and it's one of those things that over the years in Northern Ireland we have sort of built up almost a personal vendetta. Everybody's against me. And you know, that's very hard to overcome. And I have to say that's still being taught in many homes. And I'll give you an example of it. I live beside a 27-foot wall, part of what we're told was a peace wall, never brought peace, but anyway. And I remember some years ago, two Dutch reporters contacted me to say they were coming up to take some photos of this wall, and would I accompany them? And I said, yeah. So they came up. Now, if you look at the wall from my side where I live, it's just a straight wall. If you go to the Catholic side, you're looking up at the wall. There's actually a very big dip. Anyway, I took the girls round, they took their photographs. When we went to the Catholic side of the wall, this young lad came up on his bike, and he says to me, what are you doing? I says, I'm here to take a photo of that wall, I own it. I says, there's a million brick in that wall, and I'm here to count them. And he looked at me quite sincerely and says to me, oh right, and away he went. He watched what the girls were doing, he came back, so he did, sometime later, and he says, all the bricks are there, missus, aren't they? I said, yes, they're all there. He says, yes, because my dad says if that wall was to be away, the oranges, as they call the Protestants, the oranges on that side of the peace wall would come and shoot us in bed. That's only about 4 or 5 years ago. That's still being taught into young people's psychic. And there are young people grow up hearing nothing else in their community. So therefore it's inevitable that that's the enemy on the other side. It's just a fact of life. That's something we have to work hard on. It's something we're trying to change through the schools. We work in and out of all the schools, and we're trying to change that and try and put the history into a more level playing field that people understand what's going on.
Oh, okay. There was a woman down here in the centre I saw. Am I right or not? Maybe it's not. Well, sorry, I'm having trouble seeing, but I thought it was. I don't think it is, actually.
No, yeah.
Okay, never mind.
I just haven't a haircut in a while. My name's John. I've lived here for about a year and a half. I kind of have two questions. I'm sorry to bring up the contemporary politics, but we are talking about trauma. So, firstly, I wondered if you had any reflections on the inclusion of the term vexatious claims in the Queen's speech. And then secondly, I wondered if you had any reflections on the continued kind of othering of Sinn Féin on both sides of the IRC by political elites. I think it was very evident in the general election here, and it continues to be evident in the general election in Ireland. Sinn Féin are likely to pick up about 20% of the vote, and among young people they're going to probably get about 60% of the vote. And realistically, that's based on material issues, that's based on housing, and people in the Republic aren't concerned about the things that Leo Varadkar brings up in the Dáil. He consistently refers to balaclavas, and all sorts of things in an attempt to delegitimise the things that Mary Lou MacDonald says. I wondered if you had any reflections, and I should say I'm not in Sinn Féin, I'm in the Labour Party. But yeah.
I don't really, I'm not up to speed on this.
I was recently I was shown a survey, opinion survey of people, quite a large sample of people in Northern Ireland, and I wish I'd brought the stuff with me by a professor from I think from Liverpool, and it was very interesting because it showed that the big divide actually was between younger people and older people, and the younger people were much more like each other in terms of their attitudes to all the key issues than and sometimes young Catholics and young Protestants had more affinity in their attitudes than they had with their older contemporaries of the same religion. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And if I was a politician standing for election, certainly anywhere in Ireland, but certainly in the north, I would actually try and do something about that. I would think there's an opportunity there, because young people are different and they move forward. It isn't quite answering your question, but it's the only contribution I can make. So there are two parts to your question, I've forgotten it.
What was the first one?
Vexatious claims.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, in that case, I firmly believe that if anybody, it doesn't matter if he's a British soldier, who he was, if he's guilty of breaking the law, he should be brought to heel for it. I do not believe that anybody should be. But having said that, a lot of the young soldiers that I seen on the streets when the Troubles first broke out in the early 70s, some of them only 17, 18 years of age, they were only lumps of lads. I mean, it was just disgraceful to put a gun in their hand and send them out onto the street. So it was, and many of those young guys were either trying to prove they were men, or they were following out orders. But nonetheless, if they kill someone outside the law, then they should be tried for it. No matter what age they are, I think they should stand trial.
They were also scared at times. Actually.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Alf.
Yeah, you know, obviously we can talk about the Finucane case, and I've met the family, and also met the families from Ballymurphy, and you know there's a lot of unfinished issues there, and the question is how as a society one can deal with those, because one danger is it can go on forever, but equally if the victims, sorry to use the word, if the people who felt that Ballymurphy or the Finucane killing were pretty awful, and I think they were, then you think, well, something has to be done about it. We just can't walk away and leave it. And I think there's a whole area, we could spend our evening discussing that as to what is the best way forward, because you can't have a Savile inquiry about everything, because you know if it takes 10 years, whatever the Savile inquiry took about the Bloody Sunday shootings, then the people concerned will be dead, will have died at old age. So I think we've got a real issue there as to how we deal with the past. And how we get a sense of fairness and justice for the people. And I do think that I met the Ballymurphy families about 3 times, and I think you and I discussed that as well. But you know, what happened in Ballymurphy was more shocking than what happened in Derry, if I can say that. It was more shocking if one looks at it. It lasted for longer. It lasted for several days. Totally appalling. And I think the Finucane case, the shooting of Pat Finucane.
Yeah, but if you look at I was quite right. I live beside Ballymurphy, just across the road from it, and I know many people involved in it, and it was a dreadful 3 or 4 days. What always has fascinated me about the Ballymurphy massacre and Bloody Sunday, they were all committed by the one regiment. Now, for the life of me, I don't understand why Sinn Féin took up Bloody Sunday and didn't include Ballymurphy. And I've asked that question, and they just look at me and say, it was different leaders. Adams led in Ballymurphy, Martin McGuinness led in Derry. Now, in my opinion, and I lived up there when the Ballymurphy massacre, I lived just across the road, but in my opinion, they should be thoroughly investigated. And if someone's guilty of something, then again, they should be brought to trial. For me, that's the way the world works. But having said that, I was quite right. It's going on so long now that many of these people who were involved are now in their older age, and will they live to see the trial? And I have to be perfectly honest about it. I was really annoyed with the Bloody Sunday, because I watched Bloody Sunday very carefully. And when they got the inquiry, which they were entitled to, they said that was all they wanted. Once they got the result, half of them wanted to go for it, half of them didn't, half of them wanted to march, half of them didn't, and they split among themselves now. And that's what other people say, well, if you give them an inquiry, that's what's going to happen. But I do really think the Ballymurphy should get a proper inquiry. There's no doubt about that.
I've got the knowledge to answer in the detail that Alvin and you have, but I would say two things, I think. First of all, I'm a great believer in the rule of law, and therefore I think you're absolutely right. If somebody's guilty of something, then it should go to court and so on. The only other point I'd make is a much more complex one, and it doesn't just apply to Northern Ireland, and it doesn't just apply to Britain and Ireland, for that matter. When you put troops into a peacekeeping type operation anywhere in the world, innocent people get shot, and it is sometimes because there's the soldiers trying to be brave, or what. Sometimes it's because they're very scared and just trigger happy, and there's a range of reasons, and you saw this happening in a number of countries, and you will see it anywhere in any peacekeeping operation. You saw it tragically in a big way with the United Nations presence in the Congo, and we have a difficulty there, because if you're going to be responsible as a society through a government to put usually young men, but increasingly young women as well, in a peacekeeping operation, armed, in a situation which they don't understand, they're fearful about, and no matter how much education you throw at them about where they are, they'll find it difficult, and their behaviour will change. An awful lot depends on the officers in that situation, but I sometimes wonder, as you say, some of them are 17 and 18 years of age, and that is true around the world.
Yeah.
And I therefore wonder, because you could quite easily put in some of those UN troops who did some of these things and say, right, you've got to be on trial and you might go to prison for life, or indeed in some countries even worse. But so it's not an easy one, that, because I think peacekeeping operations are becoming increasingly important, and that's good because we're getting wars more contained, believe it or not. It doesn't always look that way, but if you look at the figures, we are. But we rely an awful lot on young men and women to be armed and to go into a situation which they don't understand and try and keep people apart.
Yeah.
It's a difficult
Let me give you a simple example of that. As I first said, my brother-in-law was shot by the British Army. My brother-in-law was he was a watchman at a big factory. Now, from he was a child, he had very bad rickets, so he had a very bad limp. And he was going across the open ground where he worked, over to the canteen to make himself a plate of chips. And he was going up and down, and the soldiers were out on patrol, and they seen him ducking it. They thought he was ducking and diving. And they shot him, they thought he was a sniper. Now, more unlikely sniper you never met in your life. This man had a potato in his pocket. He was going to make chips. And he was shot 5 times. Now, the family accepted it. It took him a long time, but the family accepted that. Because those young guys out that night really thought they were looking at an IRA sniper. And those kind of things happen. But I do think, in the case, as I've gone back, I do think in the case of the Ballymurphy thing, there should be an inquiry, but it should be time limited, because after all, these inquiries just make lawyers rich.
And I have to say too, this is to declare my own, I was in the forces right now. This was long before the troubles in Northern Ireland. It was some, I have to say it was 1950 something or other, 58, 59. It was only for 2 weeks. I was sent to guard Alder Grove Airport, as it was called. It was an RAF
That's right.
base. And I was given a Sten gun, which frankly was a weapon which if you drop it, it's got a tendency to go off.
Yeah.
So they were quite, and I was put out there at night with a couple of other people, and it's a wonder we didn't shoot a couple of cows that kept rustling in there.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was there for, and that was before the present troubles. So, and then when I look at and talk to young troops from other countries who are in these peacekeeping operations, I think, we're asking one hell of a lot for these people.
Yeah. Could I just say one further word
Yeah.
about Ballymurphy? Because I've discussed in detail with the families what they want to happen and so on. And eventually they said, or some of them said, look, all we want, the documents are all there, all we want is the information that's already in existence, investigated independently. And they fully accepted a 10-year a 10-year inquiry would do them no good at all, would get them nowhere. And they accepted that, and I think they were putting forward a very sensible case, and I still don't understand why the powers have never gone along with it. May and I discussed it several times, and it is one of the real stains on what happened. Terrible.
I've got a gentleman down here, but I...
Make sure that we have some questions from women. So
Well, you're absolutely right now. Just going to say to this gentleman, look, I've seen you, but I thought I saw a lady at the back. In fact, I wrongly identified, but I'm trying. I'm doing my best.
Is a whole gender perspective.
Well, absolutely.
You've all touched on it lightly.
I'm with you. Can I ask you to wait? Because I did think I saw another woman at the back there, but as I got the sex wrong this time, next time I might get it wrong again. But am I right in thinking I saw a woman at the back there?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, it's quite difficult to see. There is, yes. I'll bring you in, don't worry.
There she is, not there he is.
Well done, yes. Can you give your name?
My name is Naomi, and actually it's kind of ironic because I spent several years in feminist activism, but my question is non-gender. The murder of Lyra McKee was incredibly heartbreaking, and personally I found one of the most heartbreaking things about it was when the news first came that 4 men had been arrested, how young they were. 2 of them couldn't be identified in the news because they were underage. And I mean, I think you've already addressed some of kind of the main and most important reasons that might be, like the lack of employment, the lack of prospects, young men feeling they have to be men. So there was a gender perspective after all. But I suppose it makes me wonder about how we remember Northern Ireland and everything about the Troubles, everything that people have been through, how we do justice to what happened, what people had to survive, but also remember it in such a way that it doesn't either get romanticised or that the next generation, the people who are now 16, don't feel like they need to now take up arms again.
I think that's very important about the romanticised bit, because that's what was happening in the former Yugoslavia, where they were harking back to this battle of 500 years ago. We know it's true. Any comments on that?
I mean, I totally agree with you, but the point about it is, as I said earlier, we have that still taught in some homes, this hatred, and until we actually address that, we're never actually going to get away from it, because those children grow up and they take that on and they tell their family. I work in a big Sure Start programme, and we hope to change that, but change is not easy. But in the case of young people being involved, I mean, I've seen that 100 times more. And, you know, you just say to yourself that young person's life has just been destroyed because they'll have a criminal record. I have a friend at the moment, her grandson's up for murder. And she's the only one in the whole family supporting him. The mother and father walked away. And it's all down to drugs. It's all down to paramilitaries. It's all down to being told, here's a gun, go out and prove you're a big man. And lots of young fellas who find themselves almost on a cliff edge take that opportunity. How we work through that? At the moment we're doing our best to work through it. At the moment we're trying to make that connection and that difference. But I have to say, Lyra McKee's death was just mind-blowing, so it was. That there was young men just come around a corner and shot. Now, the story is that they were shooting at the police and they didn't mean to kill her, but that's neither here nor there. They were out to kill somebody. But you've got to also pay a certain amount of, respect's not the right word. Her death opened up this in a way that probably would not have been open for a long time. And you've seen at her funeral and all that, and you've seen all that outcome that has come out of that. And while she had to die in such a tragic circumstance, I mean, the good that will do will be fantastic, because that will show young people you don't get involved, you don't do this, you don't do that. But it is a very difficult situation, and it's also very difficult for their parents, because young people go out on the street, they don't know what the devil they're doing, so they don't. And it's the same all over the world. So you have to support the parents as well. It's not an easy situation, and Northern Ireland's still not at peace. We talk about peace, but it's still not at peace.
With the question down here, is there? Well, 2 now. I've got 2, one next to each other. Do you want to surrender to her for the moment, and then come in immediately afterwards?
I did want to pursue the whole gender question, because, you know, the way Alf quite rightly pointed out that with young people there was more in common across the divide than with older people. And I have an insane belief that the same thing might happen with women if they have a chance. And I was thinking, you know, of the earlier peace women and how, you know, they were laughed at, bloody pathetic women. And I just, you know, want to know if that now has changed, that attitude, because quite frankly we are talking about paramilitaries. I mean, we remember when I was involved with women's groups here back in the 80s, the horror stories we were hearing about women escaping from Northern Ireland. Obviously this was mainly from the Republican side in our Irish groups, and it was because of the lawlessness that the women suffered. We were talking about both physical but probably even more sexual abuse. And so there was always a gendered approach to be taken, and I don't think that that's been taken yet. I mean, most of the main players are male, obviously the paramilitaries and soldiers, etc. And I think until you look at things through that lens, and that's why, you know the importance of education and young people and the feeding back to the families, and no doubt it's probably the mothers that are more keen than the fathers. And I just think that we have to be very honest about gender at every stage.
Well, yes, I wouldn't disagree with that, but let me take you back. I mean, at one time, all our politicians were men. I joined a trade union with predominantly men, and there's nowhere you've been more discriminated against than in the trade union movement. And that was a fact of life. That's something I chose to do. But in 1994, I took 52 women from Ireland to a conference in Boston, and I have to say we went over, and I came back. I went with the firm idea I will not get involved in politics in Northern Ireland because it's orange or green, and I didn't want to be either. And I came back from that conference with a firm belief that if we were ever going to make real change in Northern Ireland, it would have to be through the politics. And so we formed the Women's Coalition. Now, the interesting thing about the Women's Coalition was very successful. We had 78 women the first time stood. We were told nobody wanted to stand. We had 78 women stood. Ken McGuinness, who's in the House of Lords, told me on the radio that, you know, they're not going to do nothing. I said, that's okay. And we were a bit of a joke. But we didn't turn out to be a joke. Because in actual fact, the Women's Coalition made such a lasting contribution to politics in Northern Ireland that will never be changed now. Today we have 90 up in Stormont, 30% of that are women. That would have been unheard of before the Women's Coalition. But people ask me, well, what about women? What about the Women's Coalition? Why did it go off the scene? I'll tell you why it went off the scene. Very simply, women didn't vote for it. And while I would go up and say, we have to have women, we have to do this, we've got to remember that, you know, I often say, and I get into trouble for saying this, you know, some of the most progressive people I've met in my long life have been men. Some of the bitchiest have been women. And we have to be aware of that. I will still push the feminine agenda, and I will try and get women into positions because I think women look at a thing differently. But that is a long-term plan. We're working on it. The coalition still, the women who were in the coalition are doing work through other mediums now, but that's ongoing. We have a big thing in Belfast this Sunday called Her Story, and it will also be an RTE. It's being shown in the United Nations and in New York, where they will flash up the photos of leading women throughout Ireland. And you know, so we're trying to push that boundary, but it ain't easy, particularly in Northern Ireland, because we've had such a male-dominant world for so long. But women are beginning to change, and particularly young women. Just watch this space.
Can I just I think that film of the Women's Coalition, which I'm sure there must be getting hold of it, is absolutely terrific. And it's got some of the Northern Ireland male politicians saying the most outrageously sexist things about women. I mean, some of them would be shocked if they had to face what they were saying then. And I was shocked when I got there. Well, Mullen, after all, shook things up a bit because she, you know, she was a woman. She was the first Secretary of State who was a woman, I think. And so she made a fantastic impact on people because of her personality and because of all the other qualities she had. really good quality. And I talked to some of the women who were trying to get into politics, and they all complained, it's too male-dominated. They complained to me, it's all too male-dominated. We women don't stand much of a chance.
Yeah, but the interesting thing, Alf, is Mo Molan was one of the best secretaries of state we ever had. But the Labour Party airbrushed her out of the history. I mean, we had a recent, 2 years ago, we had the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. Mo Molan wasn't even mentioned.
And I think that is absolutely, can I just say, that's absolutely shocking, because she was my boss for the best part of 3 years. And I think she made a phenomenal contribution. Her abilities, her energy, her dynamism, the way she was people-friendly, the way she understood street politics and all that sort of stuff compared to other sectors of state. And I think she made a big impact. But interestingly, I'll put this to you. If you talk today to nationalists or Republicans, and they'll say, what sort of contribution did Mo Molan make as an individual? They say, fantastic. If you talk to unionists, as often as not, they will say, oh, it was inevitable. Mo Molan had nothing much to do with it. Well, I'm sorry, she was my boss. I worked closely with her for several years, and I think she made a really phenomenal contribution. And I think it's disgraceful that she should be airbrushed out of history.
Yeah, but I mean,
because I don't believe the peace process would have happened without her.
No, I agree, but that's just what we're there, and we're not for going.
Anyway, I was delighted that she was my boss for 3 years, because I couldn't have had a more.
Well, I was delighted she wasn't my boss, for she was
But she was great, and she made a great
Absolutely.
contribution. And I think one thing you're pointing out in a way is the appointment of one woman can trigger a flood.
absolutely.
Because I remember when we took office in 1997 in the Blair government, one of the first things he did was to appoint Valerie Amos, the
That's
Leader
right.
of the House of
That's
Lords,
right.
a black woman,
That's
as Leader,
right.
and there was an awful lot of Lords
Yeah.
who were pretty appalled by that.
Absolutely.
But since then, both the leaders of the Leader of the Lords on the Tory side and on the Labour side have nearly all been women.
Absolutely.
I don't think there's been a man, has there? Alf, you know better than I.
Well, I can think of one.
Can you?
Well,
I'm struggling.
Look, it's Gareth Williams, but it's been mainly women.
Yeah.
And look, I don't agree with an appointed Lords. I think we should be elected. But the one benefit of an appointed one is you can appoint women, and we've got quite a lot of
disabilities.
We've got quite a lot of women and disabled people in senior positions there. But you know, let's be clear, we should still look at the House of Lords.
Are you going to get rid of the bishops, though?
Oh, yeah. When I walked into the House of Lords, I was very ambivalent about going, actually. When I went in, there were all these wheelchairs lined up, all plugged in, and I took one look. I thought, I'm getting the hell out of here before. But in fact, of course, one of the things, it is true with appointment, you can appoint people who would never get elected. I mean, I think there's a number of people with severe disabilities there who would, they can't get out of wheelchairs, they're tiny, and they have to speak through voice synthesizers and things. It's good to have them there. So we need to this is not about the House of Lords, but we need to find ways of that voice being heard. Yeah, you've been very patient. Sorry.
Can I just follow on, finish Mo? I was in the House of Lords because Mo Molan put me there.
Yeah.
And I like to think that Mo put me there to continue the work that she was taken away from. Yeah.
Well, no, can I say, I was at a conference and you were sitting in the front, and Mo whispered to me and said, go and talk to May and congratulate her. Don't tell anybody else, but she's coming to the Lords.
Yeah.
And it was in that big hotel
That's
in
right.
Cabot on Monaghan.
That's right.
And so I knew you were coming, and it was one of the best things she did.
This gentleman has been incredibly patient. Thank you very much, Garvin.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I perhaps I'd like to start by pointing out, I'm surprised that given the conversation in the last few minutes, that nobody's actually spelt out the very large number of female Northern Irish politicians, from Arlie Foster at one end of the spectrum, to Michelle O'Neill on the other, and Naomi Long in the middle, and let's not forget Claire Hammer.
Absolutely.
And now, my question is quite simply this. I'm not sure at the moment, given all that we've been talking about, whether I'm supposed to be an optimist or a pessimist. I'm delighted, for example, that the Northern Ireland Assembly and the Northern Ireland Executive are back and running. But I need hardly point out there is a certain elephant in the room which is going to trumpet very loudly in about 50 hours' time. So my question is quite simply is, given all that we've been talking about and what's happening at the moment, should we be optimistic about the future?
Right. I think if I answer that first, because I think you two are much more in touch with the situation than I am, so I think they might be more reliable. But I'll tell you this, I've been optimistic for some time, cautiously optimistic, and the reason for that is, I think, it's not, again, it's not unique to Northern Ireland, this, but they went through a fire, which burnt its way into the souls and minds of men, women and children there. They went through that, and as has happened in other situations, you come out in a funny sort of way stronger. And that's a strange thing to say, but I think you do. It does take time. It will not be quick. But when I've been over there, and I haven't been recently, but when I've been over there, I felt just talking to people that they also were cautiously optimistic. Will Brexit make a difference? I'm, again, not an optimist by nature actually, but I'm cautiously optimistic on that because both communities, the United Kingdom and the European Union, have got one very big common interest to make it work. And they've also actually got a common interest to make a range of other things work, which is really what we've got to focus on now as this has happened. So cautious optimism and a great respect to the people of Northern Ireland, who I think have been through a pretty appalling time, but have come out stronger and probably with a lot of insight.
You just need to stop lying.
But
They need to stop lying.
they need to stop. Well, I don't know about that. Right, okay, well, I hear what you said.
Can I just say an answer to your question? I was asked in America one time, coming up to the peace talks, and then, was I optimistic or pessimistic? And I said the people of Northern Ireland can't afford to be pessimistic.
That's good answer.
And I think that's quite true. With regards to Brexit, when I first heard the word Brexit, I thought it was a new breakfast cereal. And I actually went into the supermarket to see it. Then I discovered it wasn't a breakfast cereal. It was a dog's dinner.
Well, I feel I'm lying on a psychiatrist's couch to answer these questions. Look, I even said it during the referendum. I said, even if you believe in leaving for all sorts of reasons, which I didn't, there is one argument for voting to remain, and that is Ireland, particularly Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
You know, we'll probably get over some of the worst things, and you know, the human condition, we're going to be tough and so on. I still worry about whether we're not selling the people of Northern Ireland short in all this Brexit, because I think they've been through so much. And don't be patronising, people have been through so much, they've shown such resilience, and now comes this latest thing, which is challenging and difficult and maybe hard to cope with. So I vary between optimism and pessimism. We shouldn't be in this position at all. We could be moving to a much better future, and that is ridiculous. I think probably after what we've all been through, we can probably cope with the future and move forward. But it's a setback. One fantastic evening here was with Seamus Malcolm. It was about 2 years ago. And I thought that was, first of all, Seamus was a friend of mine for many years. I knew him before he was elected to Parliament, and I was given the honour of being one of the two MPs who introduced him into the House of Commons when he won his election. And I've known him for a long, long time. And I knew him when he was Deputy First Minister, sitting there in his office in Stormont, clouds of smoke, he smoked a lot, and what a great guy. And you know, it's a tragedy for Ireland that he's gone. It's an absolute tragedy. But in a way, one has to be optimistic to produce people like him. That is good for, if they have more people like Seamus Malcolm and John Hume, that is good for the future of the people of the whole of Ireland. So I suppose I move towards optimism.
I think at this stage I hand over, but I'd like to thank both of you very, very much, and I think your experience and knowledge, which you surpasses mine, because you've stayed involved much longer than I ever have, but I just did the early years of
I had no option. I didn't get a house anywhere else.
Well, I'd have got you a house in Hamilton if you'd have come
Two lads walking up the Shankill Road on a big gable wall that says no Pope here. One lad says to the other, what do you think of that? He says, my ma says she wouldn't be here either, she'd get a house somewhere else.
On that note.
Very good. But I also want to thank all of you, if I can. You've been a great audience. Thank you very much, and you've asked some good questions, and I hope we've answered them reasonably well. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. Thank you, May. Thank you, Alf. What a tremendous evening we had. This is conference number 5. There will be number 6 and number 7 and number 8. It's carrying on. There will be details of the following on in due course. And once again, thank you for supporting it. Thank you for being here on every occasion. It's been an absolute delight to present to you. Thank you so much. And thank you to our panel tonight. Thank you.